Welcome into the Quest Number 9 podcast. My name is Seth Warner, and today we're going to be talking about Kentucky basketball from fans' perspective. On this episode, we're going to have a special guest help us talk about Kentucky basketball. Tristan, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Seth. How about you?
Good. Just the busy of Kentucky basketball. We're starting to get into somewhat of the slower season. One of the big things I wanted to get your opinion on, I kind of saw this come out today, is they're starting to come out with challenges for the whole with coaches. We saw that was very chaotic this past season. What are your thoughts on that change?
Yeah, anything that we can do to speed up the end of games, I'm all for. So coaches' challenges, I hate that it's just out of bounds calls. I wish, and maybe they'll do this later, but I feel like foul calls should be reviewed.
Hmm.
It just make it the same as the NBA. And I kind of also, one of the caveats I kind of hate was you can only use it twice. There's times in the NBA they've done it 3 or 4 times a game. As long as you're right, they should keep it going. But I do think it's a positive change. You don't have to worry about players just doing this at the end of every game, just hoping that somebody got a finger on it. You only have to do it when the coaches say you can.
And you're starting to limit more and more of the coaches trying to go over there and argue with the ref. You see that every once in a while.
I can't wait for Mark Pope's first successful challenge. I hope he gives Pat Adams or one of the
Hmm.
awful officials a big
Yeah.
smile on his face.
But it's always interesting to see, like in the NBA with the challenges, when you got all the dudes in the back with the screens. That's always
Yeah.
interesting to see their reaction to
But
see if
it's
they're.
2025. It's time to,
Mm,
you need to make the right call. Example, 2014, 2015 season, if it's shot clock violation, they probably win that game and go 40-0. So wish it was around back then.
it happens. But with kind of the season coming to kind of the hedge of guys getting on campus and Kentucky really getting into the peak of their player led and player engagement like training, what were your thoughts of the first press conference from all the players?
Yeah, I think it's they had the camps this weekend, so all the players were available kind of just to talk to, and you can kind of see how they interacted with the kids and the fathers and stuff. And then today you had Brandon Garrison and Otego Away kick off kind of the off-season interviews, and I think that kind of sets the message. Those two guys are going to be the leaders for this team. Obviously, they're the guys that played the most that are returning. Brandon Garrison's got to take a big jump, and Otego Away, I mean, he'll probably be on some preseason All-American teams. So those two guys are going to have leadership roles going into this season. But yeah, it's an exciting time. You got a really good team on paper. If everybody gels well, you got a few guys that you probably need to take jumps. I mean, if you talk about Muhammad Diabate and Aberdeen, they were really good players, but they're also players that they're on the bench last year. How they fit in starting roles, if that's the scenario, they work their way in. Then you got Jaden Quaintton. How's he doing off his injury? He looked pretty good, just a few weeks removed, so it looks like recovery is going good. But yeah, it's an exciting time.
Mhm. And who out of all the new guys do you think is your favorite wild card guy?
Favorite wild card. I'm gonna say Yelovich just because he's a European guy. I've talked to him a few times. He'll be on campus soon. I don't think there's any holdups. He's excited to get on campus,
Mhm.
but I just think in terms of those European guys, you just kind of never know. You have Big Z, and you thought he was the next coming of Dirk Nowitzki when that debut game against Georgia, and then he kind of flamed out the rest of the season. Was a little inconsistent. I think Yelovich he really fits Mark Pope's system well. He shoots the ball well. He likes to pass, so I think he'll be a good fit. And then kind of see how his play style coming from Croatia kind of comes to Kentucky, how that blends.
Mhm. And Yelovich has actually been one of the guys I've been more and more falling in love with. The more you see his skill set and the more you get like context, a lot of people like aren't in love with his shooting, but when you see that the European shot is a little bit different with the ball and in with how far the line is, and he is a true point forward. They have him listed as a
Yeah,
center in the Europe, but I just think that's very interesting how he'll fit with one of the. I want to get your thoughts on one of the things that Coach Pope has said in the past about how typically his forwards are his most versatile piece. How do you think that will come together with this team?
yeah, I really liked Pope saying that because I know everybody kind of got like they all look at Amari Williams and everybody wants to find the next Amari Williams. When you're looking at a five, you're kind of looking for somebody that can rebound and protect the rim and occasionally give you some offense. And that's kind of what he had in Amari Williams, but he was also the best passer outside of Lamont Butler last year. So you had to use the five instead of the four. The four gives you a little bit more options because usually you can find guys like that that can also shoot, which Amari Williams could not do outside of 5 feet. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility because you can do the pick and pops. because he likes a big that kind of initiate the offense from the top of the key. So imagine Amari Williams if he could shoot that 17 to 22 footer, step back, make a three. It just gives you some more versatility than what you had last year. And I like that going forward. You got Yelovich that could fit that role. Muhammad Diabate, you don't like the look of his shot, but he shot a pretty good percentage from three last year. So he kind of gives you that option. And then if you want to play a small ball, Ortega could probably give you a little bit of that option at three or four. I mean, there's plenty of options that you can put in that four spot, but you can kind of play in through that five.
Do you see Ortega truly as that true?
I think if you're looking at what the NBA season has, he's a two or three. So I think Kentucky, he'll play 90% of his minutes at the two or three spot. You'll see him get some point guard action if somebody's in foul trouble, but hopefully there's not as many injuries as there were last season. But I think he'll be that true two or three, especially he needs to be what he's trying to show this season is his versatile perimeter skills. Obviously, we've seen him on the defensive end, what he can be last year through the draft process, and those instincts stand out, and that was something that the NBA teams really liked. But he's definitely a 3-and-D guy at the next level, so he's got to step up the offensive game, and I think he's going to do that at the two or three spot.
And I'll be interested to see, especially with Ortega, like you were saying, going through this draft process, having some comps like the OKC perimeter defenders that are so good, how he translates some of that, because he's really good at exploding plays, making the big plays on defense, but how he fixes those little things with like his ball handling and that kind of stuff is my big takeaway from him from the draft process. Also, with the house settlement coming down, what are your thoughts about, is it pre-implied with some of these guys that how much money they're getting, or do you think this will change the market?
The new settlement's definitely going to change a lot of things because it's making rules. This has kind
Mhm.
of been like the wild, wild west the last few years. I mean, you get guys that have reportedly make like in case of AJ Dabate $5-6 million. So the new settlement, I think it's very much needed. Obviously, that settlement doesn't take effect with a lot of these players and signed deals previously, and some of the players that are being grandfathered in and stuff like that. But the new settlement will definitely help create a market. I think the big thing is you won't just have a big business write a check anymore. You kind of have to. So it's being audited through a company called Deloitte, and they audit a lot of different areas and financial voting, a lot of different areas. But they'll help set a market, and they have to make sure that the value makes sense, and that's how they're going to do that. So you can't just have Morgan and Morgan write a $4 million check to get Jasper Johnson 2.0 in a couple of years. They got to make sure
Mhm.
that $4 million they're actually getting that kind of value. So that'll be the biggest thing for me. Obviously, there's a lot of revenue sharing that these guys will be awarded athletes the last 20 or 30 years, and a lot of money that they should have gotten. So that's pretty neat for them. I mean, you have John Wall, he'll get a pretty good look and players like that. So, but it's definitely going to be a big change for college sports. So curious to see how it all shakes out when all the details.
And right now, one of the other big things I've seen is the SEC was coming out and talking about potentially putting in like barriers of how much money each school. What have you heard about that?
I haven't heard really anything about that. That's above my pay grade. That's all Greg Sankey and all the athletic directors. But I did hear that Kentucky basketball is one of the more outspoken. They didn't want a cap on any of the sports. I think in terms of Kentucky, they'll probably be one of the leading teams that put more money in basketball than they're not monetarily, they're not going to put more money in basketball than football because football is just, it's always going to demand more money. But in terms of ratio, you may see Kentucky of the $20 million, basketball may have 6 to 7 of that, whereas football may have 12 to 13. And obviously, you got to have a little bit of some other sports. So I think that's what you'll see. And it's the luxury of being in the SEC. They can afford to do that. The same thing for the Big Ten teams. The thing that I'm looking, not necessarily forward to, but looking at is some of those mid-level programs. I mean, they're just going to have to cut some sports to save some of that funding to be competitive in sports. People are going to have to, programs are going to have to be selective in what they want to be competitive in. And definitely basketball is always going to be a priority at Kentucky.
And shifting back more to this roster, what are your thoughts on the guy that probably has the highest upside on this team compared to what we expectations?
Yeah, I think if you're just based on expectations, who has the highest upside, I'm going to go with either Jaylen Low or Denzel Aberdeen. And now, obviously, there's guys with higher ceilings, but I just think in what people expect, the common fan expects out of those two. You look at Jaylen Low's numbers, really inefficient last year. He just had to carry a ton of weight for the Pittsburgh offense, and then he also had had an injury, a nagging injury that kind of hurt his shooting a little bit. So Jaylen Low, as much as he's going to have the ball, you've seen how Lamont Butler played that Kentucky offensive initiator role last year, and I do think that Jaylen Low has another kick in his step. He may not be as good as defense as Lamont Butler, but I do think he has an extra a gear that can get past defenders, a little bit more athletic. You kind of seen flashes of it. He never really played a ton of minutes at Florida. I think he averaged somewhere 15, 17 minutes. So he was kind of the sixth, seventh man off the bench. But in the games that he really started, he really, really excelled. So I think if you're just looking at terms of what they were, if you're just kind of looking at numbers and kind of expectations, I think those are the two guys with the biggest ceilings. But also, I think one player that maybe overlooked that I think we'll probably hear good things about as well is Trent Noah. I know everybody loves the Kentucky kids, but Trent Noah, he's just Mr. Consistent. He's going to work hard. He's going to find the rebounds, and that's just something that coaches love. So I do think you'll hear good reports out of him through the summer. And then obviously you got the freshman. How's Jasper Johnson going to do? That is Mark Pope's biggest, highest ranked freshman that he's had as a coach. So how's he going to handle a player like that? Will be interesting to see.
Mhm. And with you talked about Jaylen Low, what really opened my eyes to him was some of his performances at the G League Ignite camp. He really performed well. I saw some good efficiency there against high competition was one of the things that really stood out to me. What are your thoughts on some of these guys?
Yeah, I think if you look at this roster, the way it's constructed, which you couldn't really do last year because Mark Pope needed a better roster, so he kind of had to get a bunch of one and done guys in terms of all the seniors. But if you look at Mark Pope's tenure at other places like Utah Valley State, then you look at BYU, he really likes to build continuity with the roster, so he likes returning multiple players. I think if you look at, I mean, you got Cam Williams. I mean, it's the only player that has no eligibility next year is going to go away. You have Denzel Aberdeen that has another year. You have Mohamed Diabate that has another year. You have Jaden Quaintton that has another year. So you have multiple players that can come back another season and kind of carry the torch, kind of what Brandon Garrison and Otega are doing this year. But they're also going to have bigger roles. So rather than just having one preseason All-SEC player, you may have two or three next year if everything comes to fruition and kind of the plan that Mark Pope has going forward.
And just with this roster, how do you see the balancing act that Mark Pope's going to do?
He's going to be tested this year because this is probably the deepest team he's ever had to deal with. And it's not just one of the deepest teams that he's had to do with. It's one of the deepest teams in the country. But just terms of, he's got 14 players that could be starters at definitely a mid-level school, if not definitely higher for other players. So he's definitely not going to be able to get 14 players playing time on a consistent basis. But you kind of seen last year, he's not a coach that's going to give a guy 32 minutes consistently, even 30 minutes consistently. So you're going to see a lot of players get that between that 23 and 27-minute mark. He definitely really keys in on their study that they conduct every season about kind of how efficient is a player during certain stints, how long can they go for. That was a big thing that influenced his substitution pattern last year. So he's definitely going to play 8, 9, 10 players. And it's also great to have 11, 12, 13 right there that if an injury happens, you have somebody that steps up. It wouldn't surprise me to see if somebody redshirts, just kind of the way it works. I don't think anybody plans on that. But if you're sitting there and you want to prolong your career, let's say you're Reese Potter, who's a Lexington kid, and yeah, I mean, that's probably the most money he's going to make and in terms of maybe his life. If he's making $300,000-$400,000 here at Kentucky, that's, I mean, if he wants to redshirt and take that for another year, maybe even get a small bump, that's great for him. But yeah, it'll definitely be interesting for Mark Pope with the staff, but I think they'll do a good job of it. I think everybody knows what they're getting into.
And probably the biggest spot for me that's uncertain, the shooting guard position. Who would be your pick to fill that spot?
So the one question mark I have with this team, it just doesn't have the level of shooting that last year's had. I also think that it's going to be shooting kind of by committee. So when you think of the shooting guard, you typically think of a sharpshooter or a player that can initiate like Jackson Robinson. I don't think that they're going to have somebody like that. I think it's kind of going to be like two combo guards. I think Jasper Johnson won't be a starter, but he'll be a good player coming off the bench that can play the combo guard role. He can play point, but also play that off guard spot if he's in there with Jaylen Low. But I think most of the time you'll see Denzel Aberdeen, Otega, and then you'll see them share those shooting guard responsibilities just because I think Jaylen Lowe is going to run point.
And then what are your thoughts on one of the other guys that's shown a lot of upside and has been talked about, Colin Chandler? What are your thoughts on his projection to next year?
I love Colin. He's one of my favorite interviews. I love him. Watching his growth last year was really impressive. just not even off the basketball court, just as a human being. He talked about it at the end of the year. He grew really close to Ortega, who played a key part in helping him find his confidence because he even admitted late in the season, he said, I don't know if I belong here at Kentucky. And I think at that point, he's kind of questioning whether he should go back home. He was away from his family for much of the season. And that was just something that he wasn't used to. So this year, he's got a full offseason under his belt. He didn't have to come straight from internationally to come into Kentucky and then have to go through the ramp up of his study of the Mormon church. So this year, he got a full offseason. He got married. So congratulations to him on that. But I just think he's in for, in terms of his mindset that he developed at the end of last year, having the time to get better and improve, I think he's in for a better season. I do think he'll be one of the more athletic players. And I also think he can end up being a 3-and-D guy. Maybe not to the level of Ortega, just because, I mean, Ortega was Kentucky's leading scorer last year. But in terms of seventh, eighth player on the bench, give you some spark, some energy. Look what he did at Missouri last year. I think he made 3 or 4 threes that game, locked down their best player in Caleb Grill. That's just kind of what you're looking for. I do think his role will just be he'll be ready when he's called upon. I think he'll be that kind of player this year.
And a guy last year at the last section of the year shot over 40% from three in the last 5 or 6 games. And then Mo Diabate was another big transfer you kind of brought up earlier. What are your thoughts on him?
You gotta love Mo D. He brings you Mo D. But I love that. I love that addition. If you talk to anybody that's watched Alabama or covered Alabama, they just talk about how hard of a worker he is. Just because he does everything that you want on a basketball court, outside of scoring. Now, obviously, he can score, he can bring that, but he brings defense, he brings hustle, he brings grit, he brings toughness, and that's a factor that Kentucky missed at times last season, especially in SEC play. They kind of just got bullied around a little bit. All those players coming from non-physical leagues, and the SEC is obviously officiated a lot differently. So having somebody with the SEC experience, but also the level of physicality that he brings will be awesome for this year.
And with like this recruiting class being Mark Pope's most talented, probably that you were talking about Jasper Johnson being the most talented, Malachi Moreno, how do you see these guys being able to fit in with this high physicality guys they brought in from?
Yeah, as freshmen, there's always going to be a physical. Most freshmen, with most freshmen, there's always going to be some physicality that they need to get used to, and also kind of get in the weight room. Moreno is very, very thin, so I'm not sure how much he'll contribute this year. I do think he could provide some in spurts, especially early in the season when you're playing some of those non-conference lower tier games, getting some minutes, getting some experience. Now, I think Jasper, he's probably, and if you're just looking at the most creative scorer, the Caleb Love type, kind of hot or cold, he's probably it for Kentucky. So it'll be interesting to see how he scores. But I think both those guys, you kind of get on minutes when you can earlier in the season. Mark Pope's also going to have to try to develop some chemistry on the court. It's different when you're practicing it against the same guys. So it'll be interesting to watch how that unfolds, especially early in the season.
And you talked about him a little bit during the press conference, but Brandon Garrison, there was a lot of talk about his development and kind of if he was going to stay or go early in the offseason. What are your thoughts on his development?
Yeah, it's BG time. Brandon Garrison, he's probably the funniest guy on the team. I think the big step he's got to make is just being a little bit more mature on the court. I think if you watched him from the start of the season, that maturity concern was always there, but I did feel like it got better at the end of the season. I know, especially in that Sweet 16 game, Kai Siegler got right in his face, and Brandon Garrison didn't react at all. I think that was I just took that as a big step of improvement because just a few weeks, maybe even a month or two before, he would have been throwing hands probably. So I think it's just the maturity thing. The flashes were there the whole season. He's obviously a big that can shoot. He can pass. If you're looking for the closest replacement for Amari Williams, he's probably it that you find nationally. Now, obviously, he's not one-to-one. He's his own player. But it's just trying to find that consistency and make sure he remains cool at all times.
One of the guys in my book would be Jaden Quaintton, was another guy that didn't really need much time to transition. So
Yep.
with his skill set, how do you see his off? We know how good defensively he is. Last year was all defensive team in the Big 12. How do you see Coach Pope in this offense being able to elevate him offensively and show off some of those things?
Yeah, Mark Pope is one of the most creative offensive minds in the country, and he's coming from Arizona State, and so the only thing he really showed there was his defensive side. And so I do think his passing is a little underrated. If you go back in high school and kind of look, I think he may be kind of At times he'll play the Amari Williams role. He'll initiate the offense from the top of the key. Now I don't think he's not the threat from three that Yelovich and some and Mo Diabate could be at times, but I do think he provides. He'll have a little bit. He's got the athleticism, especially on the offensive end. The score down low, he's got good footwork. He's maybe a little undersized, but he's definitely got the body, like you mentioned. And he's only 17 years old, so I think he'll be in for a good season too.
Mm-hmm. And with him, one of the things that really stood out to me, kind of watching some of his stuff, is his ball handling. He's so big, but he moves really well with the ball.
Yep. Yeah, and the only concern that you may have from him, obviously, is coming off an ACL tear.
Mm-hmm.
Does he lose any of that athleticism? Does it all come back to him? I think it does. Now, I'm not in the camp that he's going to be ready to start game one. I'm not even close to that camp. I do think he'll be playing early in the season, but I think it in terms of being cleared for basketball activities and actually being in on-court shape and being in the rhythm of playing basketball, it takes a little bit of time. So I don't think he'll be peak, especially to start the season. I think he'll probably come off the bench.
When are you defining as game one, just timeline wise?
I think game one will, I mean, I think he'll be ready to go to start the season in terms of he can play on the court. I think he'll probably play like 10 or 15 minutes, just kind of working his way up. Mark Pope is, I mean, he'd obviously had to do a ramp up process for players at BYU that come from latter day missionary trips and stuff like that. Colin Chandler, for example. So I think he has a medical background, so he knows he can't just take JQ and put him in game one and play 25 minutes game. He's well aware of that. So I know his camp thinks he'll be ready by September. I think that would be very quick, not to say that he can't be back by September. I just always like to be conservative in my expectations of injury returns. So I think September, October, he'll be ready for basketball activities. He'll be doing so. But then the season starts early November. So you're kind of trying to ramp him up, maybe play 5 minutes game one, 10 minutes the next week. But you play Louisville week two, you play, trying to think who the Champions Classic is next year. I think it's Michigan State.
We played Duke.
I know we played Duke this year.
Or we played Duke this. I think you're right. Michigan
this
State.
Past year.
Michigan State.
Kansas. Okay. So I mean, you got some high profile games to kick off the season, and you don't want to rush him into those. So I think in terms of being his peak self, I think probably mid-December is what you're looking at.
Yeah, and to think about, you were trying to figure out which team that is. We played Kansas 2020, 2021. I remember that.
Okay.
When we were so bad.
I always just hate watching the Michigan State game because it's always bad.
Yeah.
It's always the precursor to the Kentucky.
All right, that's all from the Quest Number 9 podcast. My name is Seth Warner. Tristan, do you want to tell everybody where they can find your work?
Yeah, you can catch me on Twitter, Kentucky Insider or Tristan Uda, or you can check out the Kentucky Insider or Sea Blue website pages.
All right, that's all from the Quest Number 9 podcast. Please like and subscribe, and you can go find us at Quest Number 9 on Instagram and Twitter, and I will see you next time.